1946. Harlem. 6 men killed the only man Bumpy Johnson ever called brother, a war hero who'd saved his life 3 times in 3 months. 47 minutes after finding the body. Bumpy didn't call the police. He called for rope, a truck, and 6 addresses. So how does a man turn grief into a law so brutal that an entire city remembers it for decades? Harlem woke up on February 12, 1946, and saw something that made people shut their mouths and lock their doors. A black pickup truck sat in the middle of 96th Street. Engine off. Lights dead. 6 ropes tied to the back bumper, stretched tight into the darkness where nobody wanted to look. Mrs. Patterson opened her bakery at 5:30 like every morning for the past 18 years. She was mixing bread dough when she saw the truck through her window. Her hands stopped moving. She stared for 10 seconds. Then she pulled the window shade down halfway, turned on her ovens, and started baking like nothing was outside. She did not pick up the phone. She did not walk outside to look closer. She just baked bread and kept her eyes on the flour. Across the street, Marcus Webb sat on his fire escape smoking. He was a war veteran, seen dead bodies in France, thought he left that behind. He took 2 drags of his cigarette, looked at the truck and those 6 ropes, and went back inside. He locked his door. He did not come out again until the sun was high. The news spread quiet. Real quiet. The way secrets move in neighborhoods where talking gets you hurt. One word passed from mouth to mouth in barbershops and churches and corner stores. 6. Just that number. Then 2 more words. 1 truck. Then the last piece that made everyone understand. 1 route. The same route Willie Jackson walked every morning at 4:15 to get to work. The same route where 6 men jumped him 3 nights ago and left him dying on the street. The cops showed up at 7:42. That was 2 hours after the first call came in. 2 police cars pulled up and parked 30 feet away from the truck. Officer Daniels got out. He had 28 years working these streets. He walked toward the truck, stopped 15 feet away, looked at those ropes disappearing into shadows. He looked at the faces watching from windows. He made a choice that had nothing to do with his badge. He walked back to his car, picked up the radio, and said 4 words that went into the official report. No immediate threat observed. Both police cars drove away 7 minutes later. The truck stayed until 9:15. Then men came with a tow truck and bolt cutters. They cut the ropes. They loaded everything. They cleaned the street. By 9:30, the street looked normal, but Harlem knew what had been there. The city does not forget. Suddenly, the small-time thugs who had been shaking down shop owners found somewhere else to be. The crews from out of town who thought they could push Harlem around disappeared. The balance changed that morning, not because of courts or lawyers or judges, because 200,000 people woke up and understood that new rules existed now. Cross certain lines. Pay a price the police cannot make you pay. Detective Raymond Shaw opened a case file that afternoon. Case number 4723-46. Multiple homicide. 96th Street. He wrote 3 pages of notes. He interviewed 0 witnesses. 16 days later, he closed the file. Insufficient evidence to proceed. The file went into a basement box where it sat for 38 years. By then, everyone who saw what happened was dead or smart enough to forget. Some cases get opened to find truth. Some cases get closed to keep order. This one got closed before the ink dried. Because sometimes the city decides certain questions should not be asked. The official record says 6 men went missing in February 1946. The real record, the one Harlem remembers, tells a different story. A story about what happens when you take what does not belong to you. A story about a debt paid in full. A story about the only law that mattered when the legal system turned its back. You need to understand who Willie Jackson was before he became the reason 6 men died. He was not a criminal, not a tough guy. He was a dock worker at Red Hook in Brooklyn, loading cargo that broke other men's backs for $17 a week. Rent cost $12. Food cost $4 if you were smart. That left $1 for everything else. Red Hook in 1941 smelled like wet wood and engine oil, and cheap cigarettes you bought one at a time for a penny. The docks were run by Italian crews who kept the good jobs for their own people. Willie worked the worst shifts nobody wanted, 4 in the morning until noon, loading heavy crates onto ships. He kept quiet, took his pay on Friday, and walked home through streets where his skin made him a target. March 7th, 1941. Willie finished work at noon, started walking to the bus stop. 5 white men came out of an alley. They were not cops. They were not union guys. They were the kind of men who hurt people for money. The one in front had a knife, 6 inches of steel. The one on the left had a metal pipe wrapped in tape. The other 3 had fists. The knife guy spoke first. "You've been taking jobs that belong to white men, men with families. You understand what I am saying?" Willie understood. These men were not here to talk. They were here to beat him so bad he would spend months in a hospital, maybe forever. He understood running would not work because they blocked the exits. He understood the cops would not help him. So Willie did the only thing that made sense. He fought back, not because he thought he could win, but because dying on your feet is different than dying on your knees. He punched the first guy in the face, broke his nose, broke his own knuckles doing it. The pipe hit Willie's ribs, cracked 2 of them, knocked the air out of his lungs. The knife came at his stomach. Willie twisted. The blade cut through his jacket and shirt, sliced his side open. He grabbed the knife hand, bent it back until bones snapped. The man screamed. Then all 3 of the others jumped on him. Fists, boots, pain, the taste of blood. Willie knew this was how he died. 2 gunshots cracked the air above them, not at them. Straight up. The sound bounced off the buildings. The 5 men froze. Willie looked up from the ground, bleeding on the stones, and saw Bumpy Johnson standing there with a revolver pointed at the sky. Bumpy wore a suit that cost more than Willie made in 2 months. His face showed nothing. Bumpy's voice stayed flat, calm. "From now on, he belongs to me. Any of you got a problem with that? Step forward and we handle it right now." The 5 men looked at each other, did the math, decided it was not worth it. They backed away. Then they turned and walked fast toward the street. Willie tried to stand up. His legs gave out. Bumpy walked over, kneeled down, looked at the cut on Willie's side. "You need a hospital." Willie shook his head. "Cannot afford it." Bumpy smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I did not ask if you could afford it. Come on." He helped Willie to his feet, half-carried him to a black Cadillac, put him in the back seat. They drove to a clinic in Harlem run by a doctor who did not ask questions. 3 hours later, Willie had 22 stitches holding his side together and a debt he could never repay with money. In Harlem, family was not about blood. It was about who would take a bullet for you. Willie did not join a gang that day. He made a deal without words. Bumpy gave him his life. In return, Willie would protect Bumpy's life. Not because someone ordered him to, because in a world where the system failed people like them every day, the only thing that mattered was standing by the people who stood by you, no matter what it cost. Willie Jackson went to war in June 1942 with the 92nd Infantry Division. All black soldiers, white officers who treated them like talking equipment. Willie carried an M1 rifle that weighed 9.5 pounds and believed he was fighting for freedom. He was 22 years old. He believed what they told him because the alternative was admitting nothing made sense. Italy, the Gothic Line. 200 miles of German bunkers and machine guns stretched across mountains. Willie's unit hit the line in September 1944. They moved through mud that swallowed boots and machine gun fire that turned men into meat. The official story says they won. The real story says men died screaming while officers got killed in the first minute, and somebody had to make decisions or everyone died. Willie made those decisions, not because he wanted to lead, because if nobody led, everyone died. When his lieutenant took shrapnel through the throat and bled out in 14 seconds, Willie grabbed the radio and called in artillery that saved half the unit. When the ammunition ran out, Willie organized a charge with bayonets that broke through German positions. When the medic got shot and 3 men were bleeding in a crater, Willie dragged them to safety one at a time while bullets tore up the dirt around him. He came home in March 1946 with medals, a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, scars across his back from wounds that should have killed him. They pinned the medals on his chest at a ceremony in Virginia. A general shook his hand and thanked him for his service. Then Willie got on a bus heading north to New York. He wore his uniform because it was the only good clothing he owned. They kicked him off the bus in Maryland. The driver, a white man with a mean face, said colored soldiers sat in the back or walked. Willie showed him his medals. The driver said medals did not change the rules. Willie moved to the back, sat next to a woman with a baby, and stared out the window at the country he bled for. In New York, he tried to eat at a diner. The owner told him they did not serve his kind. Willie pointed at his uniform, at his medals. The owner pointed at the door. Willie left hungry. He walked 3 more blocks, found another place that let him in, but made him wait 40 minutes while white customers got served first. He tried to get a construction job in Queens. The foreman looked at his discharge papers, looked at his medals, looked at Willie's face and said the job was filled. Willie went to the next site. Same answer. Then the next. Same answer. After a week, Willie understood. His medals meant nothing. In 1946 America, a black man with a Bronze Star was worth less than a white man with a criminal record. Harlem took him back, not with lies or pretty words, with truth. The men who ran the numbers and the illegal bars did not thank him for his service. They gave him work. Bumpy Johnson offered him a job doing security for the cash houses. $60 a week, more than the docks paid, 4 times what the government promised and never delivered. Some men win wars on battlefields and lose them on sidewalks back home. Willie was one of them. He proved he could lead men under fire, make life or death choices in seconds. Survive hell. None of it mattered when banks would not cash his checks, or when he got denied loans without explanation, or when he walked past recruiting posters showing white soldiers while black soldiers got erased from the pictures. War made him hard, made him able to hurt people without thinking twice. But America did not care what war made him. America only cared about keeping him in his place. So Willie took the only place offered, standing next to Bumpy Johnson, protecting a man who saw his value when his own country refused to. For 3 months that was enough, until 6 men decided Willie's life was worth less than the message they wanted to send. That night, the war Willie left in Italy came home to Harlem. And this time, there would be no medals for what happened next. Only bodies. Willie worked security for Bumpy Johnson for 3 months. And in those 3 months, Bumpy's power did not come from money or guns or the fear his name carried through Harlem. It came from a pair of eyes that never blinked at the wrong time. The first time happened on a Tuesday night at the Red Rooster on Lenox Avenue. Bumpy sat at his usual table in the back corner where he could see both exits and nobody could get behind him. 2 numbers runners sat across from him explaining why they came up short on the week's collections, their voices nervous and apologetic. Willie stood 6 feet behind Bumpy's left shoulder, not watching Bumpy, watching everything else. A man at the bar set his whiskey glass down too carefully, like his hands were not completely under control. His eyes flicked toward the door 3 times in 90 seconds. Willie's combat instinct started screaming before his conscious brain understood why. He moved 2 steps to his right, putting himself between Bumpy and the bar. Just as the front door opened, and a man in a long coat pulled a .38 from his waistband. Willie crossed the distance in 3 strides. His fist connected with the gunman's jaw before the weapon cleared leather, sent him spinning into a table that collapsed under the impact. The revolver skittered across the floor. Willie picked it up, emptied the cylinder, dropped the bullets into his pocket, and walked the man outside by his collar. The man with shaking hands at the bar disappeared through the back exit at the exact same moment. Bumpy never stopped his conversation with the numbers runners, never even turned his head. The second time was 3 weeks later on a bright afternoon that felt too normal to be dangerous, which is exactly when dangerous happens. Bumpy walked out of a policy bank on 132nd Street with receipts in his hand, counting the morning's take. Willie walked 2 steps ahead like he had learned to do in Italy, when German snipers made street crossings a death sentence. 3rd floor window across the street. Flash of reflected light on glass. Willie's brain processed it in fragments of a second. Wrong angle for sunlight. Wrong time of day. Glass only catches light like that when someone behind it moves. His hand shot out, grabbed Bumpy's shoulder, yanked him sideways. The window exploded outward. Something whistled through the space where Bumpy's head had been half a heartbeat earlier, buried itself in the brick wall behind them. The rifle crack came after, echoing off buildings like thunder. Willie pushed Bumpy behind a parked Chevrolet, drew his own pistol, put 3 rounds through the 3rd floor window in rapid succession. No return fire. They went up the stairs together, found the room empty except for a Springfield rifle still warm to the touch, a wooden chair positioned for the shot, and 3 spent casings on the floor. Willie picked up one casing, examined it, slipped it into his pocket. Bumpy watched without speaking. They walked back down to the street and continued the day's business like nothing had interrupted it. The 3rd time was behind the Cotton Club on a Friday night, when Harlem was loud with music and laughter and the kind of chaos that makes people careless. Bumpy left through the back door like he always did because the front entrance was where trouble waited. Willie went first, stepped into the alley, scanned the shadows. Nothing visible, nothing obvious. But something felt wrong. 2 shapes against the far wall, 30 feet away. Standing too still for people who belonged there. Hands at their sides in positions that suggested weapons. Willie did not think, did not calculate, did not wait to be sure. Combat had taught him that the men who hesitate are the men who die. He moved, 15 feet covered in under 2 seconds. His shoulder hit the first man like a battering ram. Drove him backward into brick hard enough that his skull made a sound like a melon cracking. The second man's hand came up holding a .45 automatic. Willie grabbed the wrist, twisted it up and backward, felt tendons snap and bone crack. The gun discharged, pointing at the sky. Willie stripped the weapon from the broken hand, pressed the barrel under the man's chin, and spoke one word that carried more threat than most men could deliver in a speech. Run. Both men ran, one limping, one bleeding from his head where it had kissed the wall. They disappeared around the corner into the Harlem night and were never seen in the neighborhood again. Willie walked back to where Bumpy stood in the doorway, handed him the .45, and made the only comment he would make about the situation. Next time they will send better people. Bumpy took the gun, looked at Willie for longer than he normally looked at anyone, and said something that was not gratitude because gratitude suggests surprise, and Bumpy had stopped being surprised by Willie's competence 6 weeks earlier. You do not stand next to me to scare people. You stand next to me to decide who gets to keep living." It was not a thank you. It was a recognition of function. Willie had saved Bumpy's life 3 times in 3 months. 3 times he had seen danger before it fully materialized. 3 times he had moved faster than the people trying to kill Bumpy expected anyone to move. 3 times he had been the margin between Bumpy walking away and Bumpy being carried away in a bag. The details of these incidents come from witnesses who were present. People who saw what happened and told the story afterward to friends and family, and anyone who asked the right questions. Memories shift over time. Details change with retelling, but the core facts remain consistent. Willie Jackson kept Bumpy Johnson alive through awareness and action, not through intimidation or reputation. And when 6 men came for Willie 3 months later, Bumpy Johnson remembered every single moment that Willie had stood between him and death. He remembered who had saved him, and he calculated exactly what that debt was worth paying. The clinic was above a butcher shop on Amsterdam Avenue, accessible through a side entrance and upstairs that smelled like raw meat and disinfectant. This was not a hospital. This was where you went when you needed medical attention and could not afford questions from people with badges and official forms. Willie sat on an examination table with his shirt off, exposing a knife wound that ran 6 inches down his left side from a dispute 2 nights earlier that had started over money and ended with blood on a sidewalk. The cut was deep but not fatal, clean enough that it just needed stitches and time. The doctor was 70, hands steady as iron bars, had sutured soldiers in the Great War, and learned long ago not to care how people acquired their injuries. He gave Willie a shot of morphine for the pain, waited 30 seconds for it to hit, then started threading the needle. Bumpy sat in a wooden chair near the door, watching the procedure with the detached interest of someone who had seen this scene play out dozens of times with dozens of different men. Morphine does things to your inhibitions, loosens the locks people keep on their thoughts, makes them say things they would normally keep buried. Willie's eyes went half closed, his breathing slowed, and then he started talking in a voice that sounded like it was coming from underwater. "You know why I do this." The words came out slow, each one requiring effort. "Not for the money. Money does not mean anything." Bumpy did not respond, just sat there listening while the doctor pulled thread through skin. Willie kept talking, the morphine pulling words up from places he normally kept sealed. "My whole life, people looked at me like I was temporary, like I was something you use until it breaks and then you throw it away and get another one. The docs were like that. The army was like that. Even after the medals, even after bleeding for this country, still temporary, still replaceable, still worth nothing the moment I was not useful anymore." The doctor worked methodically, tying off each stitch with practiced precision. Willie's eyes focused on the ceiling tiles, seeing something that was not in the room. "You were different, that day at Red Hook when those 5 men were going to kill me. You did not know me. You had no reason to care if I lived or died, but you stopped them anyway. And afterward, you did not treat me like I owed you my life. You treated me like my life was worth saving in the first place." Bumpy shifted position in the chair but remained silent. Willie's breathing evened out as the morphine pulled him deeper. "That is worth more than any amount of money, more than anything else. Having someone look at you and see value when the entire world has spent your whole life telling you that you have none. So when I stand next to you watching for people who want to hurt you, I am not doing it because you pay me $60 a week. I am doing it because you are the only person who ever made me believe my life was worth the effort of living it." The doctor finished the last stitch, cut the thread, began wrapping gauze around Willie's torso. Willie's eyes started to close, the morphine winning its battle with consciousness. He managed one more sentence before sleep took him completely. "If someone comes for you, They have to go through me first. That is not a job. That is a promise I am making. Bumpy sat in that chair for 10 minutes after Willie's breathing settled into the rhythm of drug-induced sleep. The doctor cleaned his instruments, packed his bag, and left the room without speaking because he had learned decades ago that some conversations were not meant to include him. When Bumpy finally stood and walked to the door, his face showed nothing, but something fundamental had shifted in the relationship between these two men. It was no longer employer and employee. It was no longer about money or protection or business arrangements. It had become something the legal system does not have language for, because the legal system is built on contracts and obligations and measurable exchanges of value. This was built on something older, a debt that could not be calculated in currency, a bond that existed outside the framework of law. When power is constructed on promises instead of payments, betraying it carries a cost that courtrooms cannot measure. You can break a business contract and settle in cash. You can violate a legal agreement and face prosecution. But when you destroy a promise between two people who have saved each other's lives, the response does not come from judges or juries. It comes from something more ancient and more permanent than any system humans have invented to regulate behavior. Nobody can verify every word spoken in that clinic above the butcher shop. The details come from people who heard the story later, passed along through networks of trust and memory, altered slightly with each retelling the way all oral history gets altered. But the outcome is documented and unchanging. 3 months after that morphine confession, 6 men killed Willie Jackson, and what Bumpy Johnson did in response was not about business or territory or maintaining his reputation in Harlem's criminal hierarchy. It was about honoring a promise made by a man who proved his word was worth more than his survival. The legal system has no framework for adjudicating that kind of debt, but the streets of Harlem understood it perfectly. 3:45 in the morning, February 9th, 1946. Willie Jackson lived on the 3rd floor of a brownstone on 140th Street, in a single room that cost him $8 a week and contained everything he owned: a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a hot plate for cooking eggs and heating soup, a window that looked out on an alley where cats fought over garbage and couples fought over everything else. Not much, but it was his. He woke to the sound of wood creaking under weight, the stairs outside his door, old boards that announced every footstep like an alarm system, multiple footsteps, moving slow and deliberate. Willie's hand went automatically to the nightstand where he kept his service pistol from the war. His fingers found empty space. The drawer was open. The gun was gone. Someone had been inside his room while he slept. The door did not open. It exploded inward, kicked off its hinges by a boot that hit with enough force to splinter the frame. 6 men filled the doorway, backlit by the hallway's single bulb. Their faces in shadow. White men, large men, dressed in dark clothing that would not show blood. They did not speak, did not make threats, did not waste time on explanations. Willie tried to stand, but his legs responded wrong, sluggish and uncoordinated like they belonged to someone else. He looked at the glass of water on his nightstand, half empty, the same glass he had drunk from before bed 2 hours earlier. They had drugged it, had been in his room while he slept, putting something in his water that made his muscles weak and his reactions slow. The 6 men spread out, surrounded the bed from all angles. Willie threw a punch at the closest one, but it moved through the air like he was underwater, slow enough that the man caught his fist easily, twisted his arm behind his back, slammed him face first into the mattress. Willie's shoulder separated with a wet pop that sent lightning through his entire left side. He tried to fight back, but his body would not obey the commands his brain was sending. They pulled him off the bed, dropped him on the wooden floor hard enough to crack ribs. Then the boots started, steel-toed work boots that had probably been purchased specifically for this purpose. They kicked his ribs, his stomach, his face, his kidneys, every soft, vulnerable part of a human body. Willie curled into a ball trying to protect his head. It did not matter. They just kicked harder, adjusted angles, found the spaces he could not cover. He lost track of time. Pain has a way of making seconds feel like hours and hours feel like seconds. His mouth filled with blood. Bones broke with sounds like green wood snapping. His vision went red, then black, then red again. Through it all, he did not scream, did not beg. The war had taught him that begging does not stop men who have decided to hurt you. It just gives them satisfaction. One of them grabbed Willie's uniform jacket from where it hung on the back of a chair. His medals were still pinned to the chest. Bronze Star for valor. Purple Heart for wounds received in combat. The man held them up so Willie could see, then ripped them off the fabric. The pins tore through the wool, leaving ragged holes. He dropped the medals on the floor, ground them under his boot heel like cigarettes. The other 5 men laughed. Willie tried to speak. Blood came out instead of words. They hauled him to his feet, dragged him to the window, shoved it open. February air rushed in, cold enough to cut. Willie's brain, even through the drugs and the pain, understood exactly what was about to happen. This was not just murder. This was theater. They were going to throw him out the window so that when people found him in the morning, it would look like suicide or an accident. So there would be confusion about what happened. So the police would have an excuse to file it away and forget about it. Willie looked at the man holding his right arm. Their eyes met for just a moment. Willie's lips moved, forming words that took 3 attempts to produce because his mouth was full of broken teeth and blood. Tell him, I am sorry. Not sorry for fighting. Not sorry for protecting Bumpy. Sorry that he failed to keep his promise. Sorry that he would not be standing next to Bumpy tomorrow when someone else tried what these 6 men were finishing tonight. Sorry that the debt he owed could not be repaid because he was about to stop existing. They threw him through the window at 3:51 in the morning. Willie Jackson fell 3 stories and hit the cobblestones hard enough that a woman 2 buildings away heard the impact through closed windows and pulled her blankets over her head, because in Harlem, in 1946, you did not investigate sounds like that if you wanted to see morning. He was still breathing when they found him 20 minutes later. Barely. A neighbor had finally worked up the courage to look outside, saw the body, called for help. They took him to Harlem Hospital where he died at 7:38 without regaining consciousness. The last words he spoke were in his apartment to men who did not care and would not remember them. The details of the time and the location come from police reports and witness statements that were recorded in the days following the incident, though the accuracy of those accounts varies depending on who you ask and how much they were willing to tell officers who they did not trust. But the outcome does not change regardless of which version of the story you hear. 6 men killed Willie Jackson in his own home and left him in the street. And when Bumpy Johnson learned about it, when someone told him that Willie's final words were an apology, something in Harlem shifted, something old and permanent and impossible to stop once it started moving. The law had procedures for murder. Harlem had something different, and that difference was about to be demonstrated in a way that would be remembered long after everyone involved was dead. Rage burns hot and fast, feels good for about 5 minutes, and then costs you everything for the next 5 years. Bumpy Johnson got the news about Willie Jackson at 8:43 on the morning of February 10th, 1946, while drinking coffee in his kitchen on Edgecombe Avenue. A kid named Marcus came up the back stairs, knocked 3 times fast. Waited, knocked twice more. That pattern meant emergency. Bumpy opened the door already knowing something had broken. Marcus was 17, had been running messages for Bumpy for 8 months, was shaking so hard the words came out broken. It is Willie. They found him on 140th Street. He is gone. Bumpy stood in the doorway for exactly 4 seconds without moving, his face showing nothing the kid could read. Then he asked one question. "Where is he now?" Marcus gave him the address. Bumpy closed the door, put on his coat, and walked the 6 blocks to Willie's building. The body was already gone by the time Bumpy arrived, but the blood was still there on the cobblestones. Dark and thick, forming a shape that told the story of a man who fell 3 stories and hit hard enough to crack pavement. A crowd had gathered, standing at a distance, talking in low voices. Bumpy pushed through them, stood looking at that stain for 2 full minutes. Did not cry, did not curse, did not kick anything or punch walls, just looked, memorized every detail, committed the shape and the location and the smell of it to permanent memory. Then he turned and walked back to his apartment without speaking to anyone. Illinois Gordon showed up at Bumpy's door at 9:30 that night, carrying a manila folder under his arm. Illinois was 52 years old, had been running intelligence operations for Bumpy since 1938, knew more about what happened in Harlem than the police commissioner and the mayor combined. He did not knock, just walked in because that was the arrangement they had when situations required immediate action. He set the folder on Bumpy's kitchen table, opened it, spread out 6 photographs like a dealer laying cards. 6 of them, white, from Hell's Kitchen, work collections and enforcement for Vincent Call. I got names, home addresses, work schedules, family connections, and the bar where they meet every Thursday night to drink and count money. Illinois tapped each photograph with his finger. These are the ones who went into Willie's apartment. These are the ones who threw him out that window. Bumpy looked at each face, did not pick up the photographs, did not touch them, just looked at 6 white men with ages ranging from 24 to 36, all with the kind of faces that come from years of hurting people for money and enjoying it. After 60 seconds of silence, Bumpy spoke without looking up from the table. "I need a truck, black pickup, stolen plates from out of state, nothing that traces back to anyone in Harlem." Illinois pulled a notepad from his jacket pocket, clicked his pen. "Rope, 6 lengths, 30 feet each. Hemp, not nylon. Hemp holds knots better when there is weight pulling against them. 8 men, nobody who talks, nobody who freezes, people who have done this kind of work before and understand we never discuss it afterward. The route from McGinty's Tavern on 10th Avenue to 96th Street. Every turn mapped, every traffic light timed, where patrol cars are at 2 in the morning on Thursday nights. Plan around them. Witnesses, I want people to see this, but from far enough away that details stay blurred. Close enough to know what they are looking at. Far enough that nobody identifies faces or makes statements to police." Illinois wrote it all down, filling pages in his neat block handwriting. When Bumpy stopped dictating, Illinois asked the question that mattered. What are we trying to accomplish? Bumpy walked to his window, looked down at Edgecombe Avenue where traffic moved through the night and people walked home from late shifts, and life continued like Willie Jackson had not just stopped existing. When he spoke, his voice was cold and flat and carried the weight of something already decided. We are not trying to kill 6 men. Any fool with a gun can do that. We are building a lesson, making sure every crew in New York understands what it costs to touch people under my protection. This is not about revenge. This is about establishing rules that last longer than the bodies. We are making something permanent. Illinois closed his notebook. When? Thursday night. They drink at McGinty's from 10 until midnight. We take them at 11:30. Drunk enough to be slow. Not drunk enough to be unconscious. 90 seconds from door breach to wheels rolling. No firearms unless absolutely required. No explanations. Just execution. The word hung in the air with both meanings intact. Illinois stood, tucked the folder under his arm, and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned back. Willie was a good man. Bumpy did not respond. Illinois left. Bumpy sat at his kitchen table looking at 6 photographs of 6 men who thought killing Willie Jackson would send a message, would make Bumpy back down, would prove that outside crews could operate in Harlem without facing consequences. They had miscalculated badly. By this time tomorrow night, every criminal organization in New York would understand that miscalculation cost more than they could afford to pay. Rage would have meant grabbing a gun right now and driving to Hell's Kitchen and shooting until the magazine was empty and the police arrived. Structure meant planning every detail, timing every movement, making sure the response was measured and surgical and impossible to connect back to anyone specific, while being absolutely devastating in its impact on everyone watching. One explosion makes people scared for a day. One properly executed lesson makes people change their behavior for years. Bumpy had watched Willie save his life 3 times in 3 months. Had listened to Willie explain through morphine haze that loyalty was not about money. It was about being seen as valuable when the world said you were worthless. That created a debt, not the kind you pay with cash. The kind you pay with action that makes certain everyone understands some promises are worth more than survival. Willie had promised to stand between Bumpy and danger. Now Willie was gone, and the 6 men responsible were about to discover that breaking a promise like that carries a price the legal system has no language for and no ability to collect. McGinty's Tavern on 10th Avenue smelled like spilled beer and old cigarettes, and the kind of violence that does not make headlines because nobody reports it. The bar had been operating in Hell's Kitchen since 1923, survived prohibition by paying the right cops and staying quiet about what happened in the back rooms where debts got settled with fists and brass knuckles and occasionally knives when fists were not sufficient. Thursday night, February 11th, 1946. 11:27. The 6 men who killed Willie Jackson sat at their usual table in the back corner, drinking whiskey that was probably stolen, counting money from collections they had made that week, laughing about something one of them said, probably a joke about the job they pulled 3 nights ago, probably reliving the moment they threw a war veteran out a 3rd-story window and listened to him hit the street below. They were drunk. Not falling down drunk, but drunk enough that their reaction time was measured in full seconds instead of fractions. Drunk enough to feel invincible in their own territory. Drunk enough that when the front door of McGinty's exploded inward at 11:28, it took them 3 full seconds to understand what was happening. The door did not get picked or forced. It got destroyed. 8 men hit it simultaneously with a battering ram made from a steel pipe wrapped in canvas. The lock tore completely out of the frame. The door itself came off its hinges and crashed flat on the floor. The sound was like a shotgun blast in the enclosed space. Every conversation in the bar stopped mid-word. 90 seconds. That was the window. 90 seconds from entry to exit, or police might respond and complicate things. The 8 men who came through that door moved with the coordination of a military unit executing a rehearsed operation. 2 went directly to the bartender, grabbed him by his collar, put him face down on the floor behind his own bar, told him to keep his eyes closed and his mouth shut if he wanted to open for business tomorrow. The other 6 went straight to the back table, no weapons drawn, no shouting, just fast, efficient violence applied to specific targets. Fists to throats, elbows to solar plexuses, knees to groins. Within 30 seconds, all 6 targets were on the floor, conscious but unable to fight back, hands being tied behind their backs with rope that cut into wrists deep enough to leave scars that would last the rest of their lives if they had lives left after tonight. Bumpy Johnson walked through the broken doorway at 11:29. He wore a black overcoat and a hat pulled low. He did not run, did not give orders, did not pull a weapon. He walked across the bar like he was inspecting property he owned, like the violence happening around him was routine maintenance, like this was just another Thursday night handling necessary business. He stopped at the table where 6 men now lay on the floor with their hands tied, looking up at him with eyes that were starting to understand. This was not a robbery. This was something specific, something personal, something they had earned. Bumpy looked at each face individually, making eye contact long enough that each man knew he had been identified. Selected. Chosen for this. He did not speak, did not explain what they had done or why they were being held or what was about to happen. He just looked at them with eyes that had watched better men die for smaller offenses. Then he nodded once to his people. They dragged all 6 out through the destroyed doorway, out into the February night where a black pickup truck sat with its engine running and its headlights off. 6 ropes were already attached to the rear bumper, pre-cut to exact lengths, pre-tied with knots that would hold under strain. The 6 men got attached to those ropes, not around their necks, around their ankles, tight enough that the knots would not slip no matter how much weight pulled against them. The truck started moving at 11:31. Slow, maybe 5 miles per hour. Walking speed. Slow enough that anyone looking out a window would see clearly what was being dragged behind that truck. Slow enough that the 6 men attached to those ropes would feel every inch of cobblestone and asphalt they traveled across. The route had been planned, days in advance. 10th Avenue to 9th, 9th to 8th, 8th across to Lenox, down Lenox into Harlem, where every street belonged to Bumpy Johnson. Windows opened. Curtains moved. People looked out and saw a black truck moving through their neighborhood, trailing 6 ropes with 6 shapes at the ends of those ropes that were making sounds that would stay in the memory of everyone who heard them. Nobody called the police. Nobody ran into the street to help. Nobody interfered because Harlem was watching a lesson being delivered, and the lesson was meant for everyone, not just the 6 men learning it the hard way. The truck stopped at 96th Street at 11:42. The exact spot where Willie Jackson's body had been found 4 days earlier, where his blood still marked the cobblestones in a stain that rain had not washed away yet. The engine stayed running. The headlights stayed dark. The 6 ropes stayed attached. Bumpy stood beside the truck looking at those bloodstains, and he spoke the only sentence he would speak all night. Not loud. Not to the 6 men who were past hearing words. To Harlem itself. You wanted to make one man an example. Tonight I made 6 men a law. The truck pulled away at 11:46, 18 minutes after the door at McGinty's had been destroyed, exactly according to the timeline Illinois had planned. It drove to a warehouse in the South Bronx where what remained of 6 men from Hell's Kitchen was left in a condition that made identification possible, but required dental records and fingerprints because faces were no longer reliable indicators. The details of this account come from multiple sources: witnesses who saw portions of the events, people who heard the story from those witnesses, police reports filed in the days afterward, newspaper articles that mentioned 6 bodies discovered but provided few specifics. The exact sequence cannot be verified with complete certainty because memory is imperfect, and people who witnessed violence tend to remember it differently than people who only heard about it. But the core facts remain consistent across all versions. 6 men killed Willie Jackson on February 9th. On February 11th, those 6 men died in a manner that everyone understood was not random, was not accidental, was not the result of some unrelated conflict. It was payment, delivered publicly, designed to be remembered, intended to establish rules that would last longer than the bodies. Detective Raymond Shaw filed his initial report at 9:20 on the morning of February 12th. Case number 4724-46. 6 deceased males discovered in South Bronx warehouse. Preliminary examination suggests severe trauma consistent with being dragged behind motor vehicle for extended distance. No witnesses have come forward. No physical evidence at scene links to specific suspects. Investigation ongoing pending medical examiner findings. The report ran 4 pages. 4 pages to document 6 deaths. Shaw spent the next 2 weeks interviewing people who claimed to have seen nothing, heard nothing, knew nothing about who might have wanted 6 men from Hell's Kitchen dead, or who might have had the resources to kill them in such a coordinated manner. On February 27th, he filed a supplemental report stating insufficient evidence existed to identify suspects or establish motive, and recommended the case be transferred to unsolved homicides, where it would join hundreds of other cases from 1946 that would never be closed. But the official silence of that 4-page report was nothing compared to the unofficial silence that spread through New York's criminal networks in the weeks that followed. The kind of silence that happens when everyone understands what happened and why it happened and decides collectively that discussing it serves no useful purpose. The crews from Brooklyn who had been expanding operations into Harlem, collecting protection from businesses on Lenox Avenue, taking percentages from policy banks on 125th Street. They pulled back, not with announcements, not with formal declarations. They just stopped showing up, stopped making collections, withdrew their people back across the river. When asked why they were abandoning profitable territory, the answers were vague. Too much heat, not worth the attention. Better opportunities elsewhere. Translation: we saw what happened to 6 men who touched someone Bumpy Johnson valued, and we have decided our lives are worth more than whatever money Harlem might generate. The Italian families who controlled most organized crime in New York sent representatives, not to threaten, not to demand explanations, to acknowledge. Flowers arrived at Stephanie Street, Claire's office, with cards that read, "In recognition of order maintained." Expensive wine got delivered to Illinois Gordon with notes saying, "With respect for professionalism demonstrated." Nobody mentioned Willie Jackson. Nobody mentioned 6 bodies. Nobody needed to. The message was clear. We understand what you did. We agree it was justified. We will not interfere with your operations. Even the police adjusted their behavior. Cops who used to shake down numbers, runners for weekly payments, started patrolling different neighborhoods. Officers who used to harass shopkeepers about permits and licenses began looking the other way. Not because they feared Bumpy Johnson specifically, but because they recognized that Harlem had proven it would enforce its own rules. And sometimes the smart play is letting communities handle their own problems rather than creating larger conflicts by interfering. Willie Jackson's funeral took place on February 14th at Abyssinian Baptist Church. Over 2,000 people attended. They filled every seat, stood along the walls, spilled out onto 138th Street for blocks in both directions. The minister spoke about sacrifice and service, about a man who fought for his country and came home to find his country would not fight for him. Musicians played. Women wept. Men stood silent with hats in their hands. Nobody mentioned the 6 men who killed Willie. Nobody made speeches about revenge or justice or what had been done in Willie's name. That silence was louder than any eulogy could have been. It said that some debts get paid, some promises get kept. Some violations carry consequences that exist outside any legal framework. Bumpy Johnson stood alone in the back of the church, not up front with family, not in the middle with business associates. In the back where he could see everyone and where his face would not be clearly visible to people looking toward the altar. When the service ended and mourners filed past the casket, Bumpy waited until the church emptied completely. Then he walked forward alone. He placed Willie's medals on the closed casket, the Bronze Star for valor under fire, the Purple Heart for wounds received in combat. Illinois had recovered them from Willie's apartment, had them professionally cleaned and restored, until they looked as good as the day they were first pinned on. Bumpy arranged them with precision, exactly as they would have been positioned on a dress uniform, perfectly aligned, properly spaced. He did not speak, did not make promises about remembering, did not apologize for failing to protect Willie when it mattered. He just completed the task, returned what belonged to Willie, fulfilled the final obligation of a promise that had been made in a doctor's office when morphine loosened Willie's tongue enough to speak truth about loyalty and value and why some men are worth dying for. Real power is not measured in gunshots or body counts. Real power is the ability to make an entire city change its behavior without issuing threats or making demands. To establish rules that everyone follows, not because they are written in law, but because everyone understands exactly what happens when those rules get broken. To create order through demonstrated willingness to follow through on every promise made and every debt owed. After February 12, 1946, everyone doing business in New York understood new rules governed Harlem. Touch the people who live under Bumpy Johnson's protection. Face consequences no court can deliver. Show disrespect to what was built in that neighborhood. Learn lessons no legal system can teach. Walk into Harlem thinking you can take what does not belong to you. Discover that some prices get paid in currencies that have nothing to do with money. The official record says 6 men died in February of 1946 and no arrests were made. The unofficial record, the one that lives in the memory of people who were there and the stories passed down through families. That record is more specific. It says 6 men killed Willie Jackson, and Bumpy Johnson made certain everyone understood what that cost. Not just those 6 men. Everyone watching. Everyone doing business. Everyone who thought about crossing lines that should never be crossed. Whether that represents justice or revenge. Whether it was necessary or excessive. Whether people have the right to create their own systems when official systems fail them. Those are questions each person must answer based on their own experience with systems that work and systems that do not. History records what happened. 6 bodies, 1 closed case, decades of changed behavior. The moral evaluation of those facts remains a matter of individual judgment. Harlem walked through one night in February of 1946 and woke up operating under new rules. Not rules written in law books. Rules written in memory. Touch family. Face consequence. Courts cannot deliver. The story of Willie Jackson became the kind people tell when discussing how power really works versus how it is supposed to work. Not to celebrate violence. To understand what happens when systems refuse to protect certain people and they build their own systems based on older rules about loyalty and debt. If you want more stories New York tried to forget, stories about rules that governed streets when official law failed, subscribe. These require weeks of research cross-referencing police reports with oral histories. Your subscription makes it possible to keep digging. Here is something worth thinking about. Was what Bumpy Johnson did justice or payment when systems turn their backs? What options remain? Where is the line between defending what you built and becoming what you fought against? These questions have no easy answers. But asking them is how we learn from history instead of just consuming it.